This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Isotope, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, Lewitt, Spectra 1964, and OWC. You're hearing my voice right now on the Lewitt Pure Tube microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX 100D mic pre and C610 complementer mixed with Isotope RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes. It's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
I have the mindset that I'm like, I spent years honing in this craft to treat every project with the amount of respect that it deserves, and also like with whatever audio treatment it deserves too. And I feel like that's something that, there's no just one trick solution for. You really have to sit with every single thing and see what serves it the most. And I feel like having AI do that pulls the emotion out of it.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Howdy, rock stars. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars. My secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar to make this podcast sound great. Right now, you're hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Go to isotope.com and use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off. My studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go look at the Mini Stack STX, Thunderbay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect solution for your studio from OWC. And thanks for using our custom link in the show notes. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, the podcast bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Raelynn Janicke, a mastering engineer and the studio manager for Infrasonic Mastering based in Nashville, Tennessee. Before joining Infrasonic in 2019, Raelynn worked at Tommy's Tracks, also a guest on the show, Tommy Wiggins, where she fulfilled a variety of roles alongside owner Tommy Wiggins, including mastering and archival work. Raelynn, aka Ray, has mastered and assisted on projects for the Shins, Kayla Hall, Nefesh Mountain, if I'm saying that right, Talia Stewart, Big 50, and Eli Howard, to name just a few. She's got many more, and we've included a playlist in the show notes, so please scroll down and just hit play on that, and you can hear a ton of great-sounding records. Ray got her bachelor's degree in applied arts and sciences with concentrations in audio engineering and computer science from Rochester Institute of Technology. Much like her career thus far, Raelynn's path to her degree was self-made. She was initially drawn to the practicality of a job in computer programming, but switched majors halfway through her program after assisting on a college a cappella record. That's kind of like my story, too. It's like,
Is it?
Yeah, you do one thing, and then you're like, ooh, making music is a lot more fun. From there, she discovered the school's modest audio program, created an individualized degree, and threw in minors in history and music technology just to keep things interesting. I'll have to remember to show you the Victrola that I've got from 1907.
Oh my God, yeah.
Ray brings this level of enthusiasm and exploration to every project she works on at Infrasonic Mastering, both as manager and engineer. So we got lots to talk about there. She describes herself on her website as a mastering engineer who loves tacos and is taller than Danny DeVito. So go, I don't know. What do you say to Danny DeVito? Up your nose with the rubber hose or something?
I love Danny DeVito, but there's so few people in the world that I'm taller than that I'm like, man, I love him and I got to take this for myself.
I love it, man. I love it. Danny's awesome. Goes all the way back to Taxi. Come on, for those of us who are watching TV in the day. Thank you to F. Reed Shippen for connecting us. Today we're going to talk about things like how tech meets the art of mastering, running a busy multi-room facility, Atmos immersive audio. I bet we're going to talk about that. And maybe even like how AI and mastering can affect our future of music. Mm-hmm. Please welcome Raelynn Janicke to Recording Studio Rockstars. Ray, are you ready to rock?
She's ready to rock.
Awesome. So cool to have you here. It's really nice to meet you and finally get to connect and do a podcast interview together.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I know the rest of the corral is on the way. So Rockstars, Ray is managing Infrasonic, which means she takes care of all these crazy art types who, can't run their own schedules. No, not really. But she's the one who is helping book a bunch of great guests on the show. We just had F. Reed Shippen on. We're going to have Pete Lyman, lots of others coming up. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited for that. In fact, I think the next interview I'm doing is with Infrasonic West, and then soon we'll be doing an in-studio one right here at Infrasonic East, and I'll actually take the rig over there and we'll talk to a bunch of folks. So tell us a little bit more about, yourself and getting into all this. It's cool to hear your background. Like what you did an a cappella record. First of all, I love the fact that it's this time and day and age, post Pitch Perfect and everything. Oh my God.
An a cappella record is even like a thing that you do when you're in school.
Well, so I grew up playing alto saxophone from like 3rd grade to 12th grade, and I sang in chorus and did the whole thing. And my family's always been very music focused. My dad plays guitar, and that's always been his thing. And my mom and I always listen to records in her car and stuff. And my older sister really introduced me to the punk scene in New York where we grew up.
Nice.
So her and I used to go to shows together or whatever. Or if we weren't old enough, our dad would take us.
Is that why you have all those cool tattoos and colors all over your arms?
Well,
you got some good ones there. Is that a casket? Kind of
It is. I have a little casket here. And then this one, the skull, is actually a matching tattoo that my dad and I have.
That's awesome.
So I have a bunch of random ones, but I think, I definitely think my parents and my sister molded my music taste a little bit because I grew up with a Dimebag Darrell cardboard cutout in my house, and that was normal for me. And then my sister taking me to shows Our high school was very small, rural upstate New York.
Oh, upstate. Okay. So not New York City.
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. But it's you're in high school and it's tunnel vision, and then you go out and
I know you're wearing a Dimebag Darrell t-shirt right now.
I got to rock it.
We forgot to take a selfie in the studio, so we'll have to do
we'll
that.
do one upstairs.
Actually, I'll do one right now. We're going to do live selfies, rock stars. Watch this without even leaving our podcast positions. That's perfect.
I love it.
That's the new way.
Oh, yeah.
You just witnessed a live selfie in audio only.
I loved it.
Right. So you didn't even hear me take the selfie because I have the camera turned off. So quick question about your tattoos too.
Yes.
Is it a little bit like finishing your first record where it's you're so when you do sometimes when you do an early record, you can't quite finish because you can't make the decision that it's done enough. And I think about the reverse almost with tattoos where it's how do you decide which tattoo is okay to make it your first tattoo?
Oh, man. Well, so my older sister, growing up, she had her hair every color of the rainbow. She got tattooed as soon as she was old enough to. And I was oh man, I want to be like Rayanne. She's so cool. I want to be just like her. So I was on my 18th birthday, I booked a tattoo appointment for my first tattoo. And I left Spanish class early. Sorry, Mrs. Muth. And I went and got a tattoo, and I sat for 5 hours by myself on my 18th birthday, which was in hindsight a really awful idea. But there was this one hardcore band in Boston that I loved growing up called Ligeia. So
nice.
I ended up getting on my back, I have a big pocket watch with one of their lyrics on it. And I don't know why I was this is the first thing that I want, but I was just that looks cool. Let's do it. And I feel that's kind of how my tattoo journey has been. I'm just that looks cool. Let's do it.
Is it painful to get one on your back at all? I mean, I imagine there's probably like places that are sensitive, like the inside of my arm. Probably
inside of the elbow, like your elbow ditch. The last time I got my tattoo
what's it called? Your elbow ditch?
Yeah, your ditch.
Your ditch.
Your ditch. When I got my ditch done, my arm was swollen for like 3 days. But then I have other ones where like I have one on my hip that I fell asleep during because it just feels like vibration in certain spots. Like it doesn't feel painful.
And then you woke up and you're like, oh my God, wait, that's the wrong.
Be like, I didn't want this. No.
So that's cool. So you guys grew up going to all these punk shows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big fan of that too. I mean, for me, it was sort of like college is when I discovered cool punk music and just, I loved going to see shows in clubs that are painted all flat black. And and they smell like the mop for cleaning the place when the show
If you're
starts.
Lucky, it smells like the mop that they maybe used the night before.
Yeah. I just feel like there's so much fun music that happens there,
It's so great. Like there was this one venue in downtown Albany called Valentine's that we always went to. And it was usually like 16 and up shows. So once I turned 16, I would go all the time with my sister because we would be like, Dad, you don't have to come, hang out at home. But that was like super dirty, grimy kind of club, like the upstairs where most of the like local bands or like hardcore bands traveling through town would go. But that's what made it so fun because there was no like security. There's no barrier. You're up against the stage and they're screaming in your face. And it's like, oh, yeah.
And your dad was like, oh, those are some upstanding, good, wholesome hardcore bands, young gentlemen coming through town or whatever.
You're gonna line them up. I remember this so vividly. There was like one time I was maybe like 11 or 12 years old. And my dad brought me to see Avenged Sevenfold play because I was like, this is so hard. Like, yeah. and
are they like, do you think of them now as more commercial or something?
I look at it now and I'm like, there's better stuff out there. I do love their old stuff. Like that is very nostalgic for me, but I'm like, there's other things out there. But we were at that show and it was like in a big armory. And I was like, Dad, I want to crowd surf. And he was like, okay. So he picked me up and he was like, meet me in the back when you're done. And I was like, that's awesome. Like, I'm so happy that was my childhood experience.
Do you think Danny DeVito ever crowd surfed?
Oh my God, absolutely.
Danny, let us know. All right. Well, cool. So doing the hardcore music, you went to school and let's see, where was your, it was Rochester, right?
Yes.
RIT.
Yep.
And you were going to go get a sensible career in computer programming.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the computer stuff, like my mom, I was into programming and basic and making games in 8th grade. My mom was always like, Elijah, I really think but Elijah's my full name. I really think you should have gone into, computers,
Yeah.
So I was like, but then I sort of felt like computers are us when it comes to making records anyway.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're still doing computers anyway?
I sometimes feel that way with the amount of like troubleshooting that we have to do because gear is so finicky. I feel like that's something I still struggle with. But yeah, I definitely went into that career because I was like, I have job security. I'll be good. Like I want to be a financially stable human being because like we didn't really grow up with a lot of money. So I was like, okay, what can I do to get myself in like a good financial place? Go for this job that I will absolutely be able to pursue. And then I was like in an a cappella group when I was in college and we tracked an EP and I like somehow.
That was the one that you recorded. You were in the group too.
Oh,
that
yeah.
Makes it double fun.
I ended up like.
You were like, hey, guys, I really think we need to remix this. Yeah. I need to turn my voice up a little bit.
Be like, oh, I can't hear myself going doom loud enough. But so I ended up like helping that engineer edit the record, or I don't even remember what I did for him. But it ended up just kind of happening where I helped him out with it. I helped him finish it up, like get it off for mastering at the time, and had no idea what mastering was at that point either, which is foreshadowing. But I ended up just being like, oh my God, this is so much better than what I'm doing. And like doing computer science at that level, like I did computer science in a tiny rural town in New York and was really good at it. And then I went to this big university with people that have been coding since they were like 10 years old. And you go and it's just like, I remember having a panic attack in the bathroom one day and being like, I need to change what I'm doing because this is not good.
Well, you're like, wait a minute, your uncle was Steve Jobs? What?
Yeah, I'm like, oh my God, what's that like? So I ended up switching my major and it was like an audio option through the electrical engineering department at my college. It was like one tiny little room with like a digital Yamaha console. And that was like it pretty
Oh,
much.
the Yamaha O2R?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a tough
very
console.
Small. Yeah. And we didn't even use it. Like, it was just like.
It was old news at that point.
Exactly.
Right? I was using it when it was new news.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember that when you would go to make a mix move, you had to like choreograph like 5 dance moves all at once just to make the move. And then it was like, oh crap, I forgot dance move number 4.
Yeah. And it was hard too, because there were like 20 of us in the program with this one little console. So it's like a bunch of us like sitting in front of it at once trying to like, hey, you do this, you do this, you do this. So I definitely feel like real world experience topped what I got in college, but I'm happy that I went through that experience to get where I am. But yeah, I definitely still feel like mastering gives me that, like, scratches the itch of like computer and tech that I loved, with me being able to still be creative and like work on music as a career, which is insane to me.
Yeah. Did the computer tech world and the audio world, did it feel like, as going into it as a woman, did it feel like it was sort of there were a lot of guys in those fields, or like what was your experience, and did that even matter? I mean, was it just super interest of yours? So like whatever.
Yeah, I think I've always kind of been a little bit more on the like like tomboy side of the spectrum. Like growing up, like I had my older sister and she had like a group of friends that were all guys that lived in the neighborhood. And then all my best friends growing up were guys that lived in my neighborhood. So it's like, you know, I grew up playing Mario Kart and like hanging out in their living room.
So awesome.
Yeah, it is. I still have it. I'm like, I have a
turtles.
Oh yeah. You throw a little blue shell action. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I bought a Switch for myself for Christmas a few years ago, and it was the best money I've ever spent.
Nice.
But like, I always grew up like surrounded by guys, and my dad and I are super close, and he's like total hard ass, like truck driver guy. And he's just like I get a lot of who I am from him. So for me, like being a woman in any industry, I don't really like consciously think about it, I guess, because I'm like, screw it, I'm interested in it, I'm gonna do it, you know?
Nice.
But that being said, I was like one of 2 women in our audio program, and I was like, this is kind of weird, but like whatever. I just want to be doing this.
I'm gonna make better sounding records anyway.
Yeah, I was like, whatever, guys.
Okay, we don't have to stay too much on this topic, but I am curious. Have you ever discovered or felt like men and women hear differently, like just physically or sonically or anything like that? I've heard I've heard things said like as we age and get older, you know, we our hearing changes differently.
Yeah,
but I wondered if you've discovered anything like that.
I think I definitely have. I think A, the fact that I'm a woman, and B, I'm so young, like I still have a lot of that frequency response.
Yeah.
Especially like the high end stuff.
What's it like up there?
Yeah, I'm like, it's loud. But
and I do have questions about that, actually.
Yeah, I think it's just a little bit, I have a little bit more high end than some of the people that are out there because I'm just young and a woman.
Well, what's your age now?
I'm 29.
29. Okay, yeah. Cool. Hey, rock stars, have you checked out Native Instruments recently? Look, no matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synths, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I personally love recording and tracking real bands in my studio, but then also adding awesome overdubs from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid Keys, for example. Go pick up Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Some restrictions apply. Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you're setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the A-series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the Atom audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. So that brings this question right to the forefront. What do you think about people's ability to hear high-end and brightening the, quote, air in mastering?
Yeah.
Do you think that bringing up top as part of a mastering process is a normal and appropriate thing to do? Is that something that maybe people do too much of or too little of? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it really depends on where that is when the mix comes to us. I think 90% of the time in general, I do add like a half dB at like 40K with the Maggie Q, like their airband, because I just love the way that sounds. It's like so ethereal up at top. But I don't know. I feel like it kind of goes through trends where a lot of the times we'll get mixes in that sound super dark and super dull. And we're like, what is happening right now? But then we get some like that we got this week where it's like 7K is just like busting. And you're like, oh my God, it's so loud. So it's weird. It's like it goes through trends, I feel like, but it's also hard because it's like,
so it's like artistically appropriate one way or the other way.
Yes,
sometimes.
I think so. I really try not to like put my thumbprint on what I'm doing for mastering. I really want it to honor what the mix has going on, but just like polishing it up. So I feel like, if it comes in and it already has enough brightness to it, I'm not going to add more just for the sake of being like, well, I do this on everything else. Might as well put it on here too.
Even if you're kind of feeling it, or is that sort of a struggle sometimes where you have to decide, if I'm feeling it, do I just go for it artistically or do I hold back?
Yeah, I think it really depends on where it's at in the mix. Like if I feel like it's fine, I'm like, cool, I'm going to leave that where it is. It was probably intentional that way. But if I really feel like something is lacking and it needs a little bit more excitement, then I'll just be like, all right, we're doing it.
Yeah, because I guess you can always do it. And then if they don't like it, hopefully you have a good dialogue. That must be an important part of mastering, is having that open communication.
Oh, yeah.
Because you want people to let you know if they're, do you find it's more valuable that people will let you know if they love the way something sounds, or if they let you know that they don't love the way something sounds?
I would rather have someone be brutally honest with me if they don't like something and be like, hey, I hate the way this sounds. Can we do this? And I'll be like, absolutely. Like, I have no pride. I don't want someone to sugarcoat something for me to make me feel better. I'm like, if you're not happy, I'm not happy. So you better tell me if this sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember feeling that way working with one of the first bands I was in the studio with. And, the guy would just walk in and just be like, oh, that sounds like shit. And I was like, oh, that's great. Nobody gives feedback like that. Great. Now we can just go another direction.
Yeah. I'm like, it's not a pride thing for me. I really that's the one thing that I really value about being around so many people that have been in this way longer than I have, is their number one thing is like, don't tie your worth to your like projects, because if someone comes in and they say they hate it, then you're like, oh my God, my life is over. But if someone comes in and they're just like, hey, I don't like the way it sounds, I'm like, awesome. What do we need to do to fix that? Like, I've really tried to remove my pride and my worth from my mastering work.
Right. But if they come in and love it, then you take all the credit.
Oh, 100%. Then I'm like, I'm amazing.
Bring it. That's cool. So you finished at RIT, and then what was the next move for you? Did you come to Nashville, and you worked with Tommy too, which is cool. Tommy's been Rockstar's Tommy Wiggins, but he's an early guest on the podcast.
Yes.
Got to go to his studio. I wonder, was it the same one, the studio that I interviewed him at, which is upstairs in the kind of loft studio?
Yes.
His place?
So I interned when he was and assisted when he was still there, but him and his wife moved. They're like over in West now somewhere.
Okay,
I think.
right.
But I moved to Boston when I graduated. I had like spent the summers there interning for like different studios. And
What are some Boston studios? Because I grew up there.
Yeah.
But I left before I got interested in this, and then I would hear that there were these like, I remember, wasn't Apache was a famous studio in Boston, maybe? That's probably before.
I can't remember.
Before you were there.
There was one that I interned at that was called Mix One Studios. That was over by Fenway. But it was more of like post stuff and like VO and not so much music. So I was like, okay, never mind. Yeah. And then I went and I interned for Soundtrack Boston for a summer, and they're like down in Back Bay. And they do a lot of like VO and post and like ADR and stuff too. But it was like, they were doing stuff for like Bob's Burgers. And that's like one of my favorite shows. So I was like, oh, this is amazing. So I like interned there one summer when I was still in school. And then when I graduated, they were like, do you want to come back in a paid position? And I was like, hell yeah. So I went and I did that.
That's kind of rare to have that opportunity too.
Yeah. So I was like, I am jumping on this so hard. Let's go. So I did that for probably like 6 or 7 months. But then it was like, I would go in the mornings and the engineers were just like kind of mopey and like weren't super stoked to be there. And I was like, well, this doesn't make me feel good about the future here. So there was one engineer there, Kevin, who I still keep in contact with. And he is just like the sweetest guy. And he was always the one that did the Bob's Burger stuff. And he was like the only person that let me sit in with him. He was
is Bob's Burger a cartoon or something?
It is. It's
is it very upbeat? Is it like a SpongeBob?
It's, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like about a family that owns a burger restaurant and they have 3 kids who are all like super weird. Like, and it's just a really great. It's more of an adult cartoon.
Right.
But it's so wholesome and it's so sweet and I love it.
So wholesome.
So wholesome.
She said right after watching the punk rock show.
Yeah. It's always so funny to me when people are like, Ray, you're a badass. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much. And then it like negates it immediately. But yeah, Kevin was the only engineer there that really like let me sit in with him and like learn and touch faders and like do the thing. But I ended up going to the COO worked, like she was in the office with us every day. And I went up to her one day and I was like, Amy, I'm not happy here. What do I do? And she was just like, get out. And I was like, okay. So then I quit. And literally that day, I got a call that I was bartending for Barcelona Wine Bar at the time in Boston. And they were like, we're going to open one in Nashville. Do you want to go be a trainer? And I was like, hell yeah.
Right. So you were already thinking about Nashville as a music city too.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So I was like, what's my next move going to be? And then literally that day, the universe was like, here you go. Here's Nashville. So I ended up coming down here for like 2 months as a trainer and just kind of fell in love with it and went back to Boston, packed up all my stuff and drove down here. And then a week later, I met Tommy through just like a mutual friend that was like, he's looking for an assistant. Like, are you interested? And I was like, I don't know what I want to do, but like, I want to do something with music.
Yeah.
So I went and had an interview with him and then started the next day. And then I worked with Tommy for like 3 years.
Tommy's cool. And he does, and some of those records are in your playlist too. And I was digging, they really have a thing too, which I imagine comes from Tommy's background too. He's very analog.
Oh,
it's all on tape and stuff like that. And it's got that warm kind of analog tapey quality.
Yeah, I learned mastering all analog with him. I didn't do any digital processing until I started working with Infrasonic. And then I was like, whoa, this is a whole different world.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? It seems like that is a cool way to do it. I mean, it's like if you learn it begs the question now, because things are so digital, do we really have to, like, is an analog version of something really the step to doing it in digital? Or is it like, can you just jump right in and learn things in digital? I mean, in that EDM world, everything's digital. It's all like you learn Ableton.
Yeah.
And you just go, I'm learning it now.
I love that. I think like, I'm very grateful that was how I learned because I really feel like it taught me how to do the best I could with a limited amount of tools.
Yeah.
And I think it was helpful for me with signal flow and stuff like that to know like, okay, where is this going? How are we getting this into the computer? Like we used radar, which was a time.
It's a good sounding piece of gear though, isn't it?
It is. It sounded great. It was a pain in the ass, but it was really, really worth it. And then, being able to have unlimited options in the digital realm was really nice, but that can be super overwhelming if you come from only having, X, Y, and Z as your tools, and then you have the whole enchilada, the whole alphabet at your disposal. It's like, oh my God.
Right. Whole alphabet being now you're in digital. There's like every plugin you could ever think of.
It's like option paralysis. It's like, what do I do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was interviewing Kim Rose, and I think we spent a bit of time talking about learning the importance of comparison listening. It's like mastering. Well, I'm learning to do more of it in mixing. But I feel like the message about mastering was it's really like comparison shopping. It's like this versus that, right?
Yeah.
Talk a little
Absolutely.
bit about that. What does that mean? Maybe break that down for the rock stars and explain why that is important.
Yeah. I think I'm very lucky in that I came in with the digital processing with people that were already doing it. Like Pete and Dan were so helpful getting me into that realm when I started. And I think because I work in Dan's room, like him and I share the gear and everything. And his is a hybrid setup, so I could still scratch the analog itch while still having the digital. But, there'd be times where I would run something, through the gear and be like, not really loving how that sounds. Let me just like throw everything back in the box and see how it sounds then. And sometimes like it really just depends on what the material is. Like sometimes I'll run stuff through his massive passive, like without anything on it, just running it through the tubes. And I'm like, ooh, this is something I could never get with a plugin.
Right.
Right,
so, because you've heard it enough times now, you know
exactly
what the difference is.
So I think the comparison of like your mix to the mix to what your master is really important, like being able to A/B back and forth.
And
but
how do you do that? Is that a switch on a speaker?
So
knob kind of thing?
Dan's console, you can switch between like the raw and what you're doing with mastering if you run it out. Otherwise, if you're in the box, you can just bypass all the plugins and everything, and it'll just be the raw.
Do you ever use Perception from Meter Plugs?
No.
Ian Shepherd's plugin. It's pretty cool. It does. It gives you that bypass capability. So if you put it at the beginning of the chain and at the end of the chain, you can have all your plugins in between, and it automatically level matches between them.
Oh wow!
And I think compensates for latency as well. So then you can flip between an AB. It's Perception AB. You can flip the AB switch and hear no processing, all the processing at a level match. So you can kind of get that.
That's awesome.
Comparison shopping.
Love that.
On, But that stuff's fun. I mean, I think I did a lot of that instinctively, learning how to make records. But I think a lot of times it was a long time before I learned the simple lesson that we think louder is better.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time making decisions like, oh, it's louder, it's better.
Yeah.
And then moving on and thinking I was comparison shopping.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we get a lot, especially when we work with major labels. Like A&R is always like, we want it louder, we want it louder, we want it louder. And it's like, you are compromising the dynamic range of what this is supposed to be like because you're just like, louder, more.
Yeah. And then, of course, the frustrating thing is because if somebody's writing the check, they're automatically right.
Yep. I'm like, oh man, what a bummer.
Do you want to explain to here, go ahead and have a sip of water, but do you want to explain to the rock stars what this louder thing is and why it matters?
Yeah. So a big part of mastering is gain staging and being able to get things up to the loudness that's competitive, whatever is out on Spotify, whatever. It can sometimes be hard because Spotify and Apple Music and all of those other streaming platforms have their own normalization processes that they throw on things. So that kind of just levels the playing field. And if you deliver something too loud, it's going to squash the hell out of it and be way quieter on the streaming platform.
Right.
So it's kind of like a goose chase for us to be like, okay, this is where I know it needs to sit to transfer properly when it goes off for distribution. But sometimes people don't understand that. And they're just like, well, it's not loud enough. I want it louder. And, it's our job to educate them and say, well, when this goes out, if you want it to be louder, it'll get squashed by their algorithm. But, it's not our baby. So we just have to be like, all right, you want it louder? Here it is.
Is the final destination almost always streaming now?
Yeah.
So it really would benefit whoever's asking for something to be able to hear the actual streaming result.
Yeah.
Like if they could hear, what does it sound like if I press play on Spotify right now, that would give them a clue as to what they're asking for.
I wish that was a thing that we could do. I wish that we could mimic the algorithm just to be like, this is what it's going to sound like when it goes out.
So I do have a couple of suggestions.
Oh, yeah.
I'm full of suggestions, but it's the benefit of interviewing so many people. I learn about a lot of things and get to share it. So again, Ian Shepherd has a tool called Loudness Penalty, which is both a website where you can upload a couple of files and it gives you the level matched version that you would get on any of the streaming platforms to compare it.
I'm writing this down right now.
And then it's also a plugin that you can put in on the master fader when mastering or mixing to hear how it's going to sound at that. So in other words, Rockstars, you can be limiting stuff to get it louder, but then you can hear, if your loudness is going up so much that Spotify would then turn it down, you'll hear what that result is. So you can kind of hear that sweet spot. And then the other tool that's really useful that I use a lot now is called Samply. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they've even been a sponsor on the podcast.
Oh, that's great.
And they create a cloud platform where you can create projects, especially for mastering. A lot of people use it for mastering, like mystery room mastering, stuff like that. And you can deliver the masters as a project file, and it will play seamless through like DDP.
Awesome.
Am I saying that DDP right?
Yep.
Yeah, like a DDP file, but it'll also level match between things and give you like that. You can do versions of songs and loudness levels if you're doing versions of mix or versions of master.
Yeah.
And it gives you like Spotify level matching between them and stuff like that. So
that's so sick.
It's kind of cool. Again, I'm familiarizing myself more and more with this stuff. But I think it's one of those topics that came up a bunch and then now we're coming to the point where I think people are beginning to understand and it's becoming sort of internalized by everybody, I guess, except for some of the labels who are still saying make it louder.
Like I always want to honor the dynamic integrity of whatever mix I get. If it's already like slamming, looking like a brick when I get it, then I can't really do much. But if I get something like I just did this really beautiful acoustic record and I was like, I'm not going to slam the shit out of this for no reason. Like I'm going to make it feel like an experience when you're listening to it. And people are much more receptive to that than being like, oh, here, I made it louder for you. Here you go.
Right. Acoustic with drums too, or acoustic just like no drums?
No drums.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful and open and like ethereal sounding. I was like, oh, this is so good.
Well, it's a funny thing because like there's that experience, there's the hi-fi experience where you listen to something on really good speakers, a really good system, and you can learn to like greatly appreciate how real it sounds. Like you go listen to Kind of Blue for the first time on vinyl on somebody's, $20,000 speakers, and you're like, oh my God, it's like the drums are right there. You know? So there's that kind of experience. And then somehow there's like a marriage between things being, mastering and exciting things and making them loud enough.
Yeah.
So that you get that kind of graphic quality, but not overly loud where it loses the reality.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I'm like, I always want to honor that. I want to honor what it's supposed to be,
Yeah. And now what are your thoughts about how much that same kind of thinking exists when you get into, really distorted music or heavy music or electronic stuff or really, EDM dance kind of process things?
Yeah.
I mean, I personally think it still lives there. I think there's still like a hi-fi quality that can be there.
I think so too.
But it does change, right?
But definitely. I fortunately get to do a lot of like hardcore metal stuff, which is awesome because I'm like, that's what I grew up on. That's like stuff that I would listen to anyway. So I definitely tend to slap her a little bit harder in those cases. I definitely still want to honor dynamics if they're there. But I know I can kind of get away with being a little more loosey-goosey with that and just being like, I'm going to run this through like the Brainworks Townhouse compressor and slam the shit out of it. And it's going to sound awesome.
Nice. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. When we use the word dynamics, sometimes it sounds a little science-y. You know? It's like, I think when we hear that, we might think like, oh, does this mean like, loud to soft sections of the song? Or does it mean more like what happens to just the kicks and snares every time they hit?
Ooh. I think for me, because maybe this is my like music brain growing up and like sheet music, I think of dynamics as like, if you like crescendo into something and like really build up, like for me, that's what dynamics and stuff is in my brain is like, oh, if I'm playing a piece, how do I portray that emotion through like how loud I play or how fast or how soft or like how much power I'm putting into it, like that kind of stuff. But
so that's a little more like the expressiveness of the music, not just like whether the kick or the snare is getting clipped off.
Yeah. For me, it's more of that. Like I'm definitely conscious of like not killing transients and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I guess in my brain, the integrity of the dynamics is like the emotion that is still behind it being portrayed the right way.
Let's talk about how people deliver mixes to you for a moment.
Let's do it.
On this topic. So do you find that a lot of people are mixing where they're doing, what you might call a heater mix, and that's what everybody's listening to a lot of the time, but then they're delivering you a non-limited mix for the mastering process? What's been your experience in that department?
Yeah. So a lot of the times we get both. We get whatever the heated ref is that they have been showing to the clients or whoever else, like management. And then we get the less limited one. And the benefit of that is that the less limited, we have more room to do what we want, but we still have the ability to know what they're hearing so that we can do that comparison and be like, is this as loud as the ref that they had? Is the bass hitting as strong as this one is? Like, are the transients still there? Is the vocal sticking out enough? That kind of stuff. So it's nice having the less limited so that we can still do our job while having like a reference while we're doing it.
Yeah. So what's interesting about having those variations and working through it is learning that like if you've got the mix and then you're working on the master and then you want to compare what you've mastered to what you started with, in that instance, you might want to level match the two things, right? So that you're not fooled by louder and you're like, does what I'm doing now just hopefully sound a little bit better?
Yeah, exactly. So we use Wavelab as our DAW. And Wavelab 11 has the feature where you can add a reference track to the track that your audio is on. And you can A/B back and forth. And I think the new version automatically level matches, which is not great. Like I understand that feature, but I'm like, it's helpful for us to go in and level match ourselves.
Right.
Just in case. But it's always level matched whatever reference we have to what we're doing. So we don't get that like, mine's louder. This sounds better.
So automatic level matching is probably something we run up against a lot with plugins that are doing that stuff for us automatically.
Yes.
Like I use reference from mastering the mix when I'm mixing, and it does a level match between things.
Mm-hmm.
And then metric AB, I think, does that. The perception, the stuff from meter plugs. But you're saying you don't always want that because what are some of the reasons you would want to level match it yourself versus letting it auto level match?
Yeah, I think we just always want to hear the mix for what it is. And if we are having it automatically level match as we're going through and making changes and stuff too, it kind of makes it hard for us to have a target that we're going against because it's constantly shifting with what our moves are. So it can just be a little frustrating if it's like, nah, just stay in this one place. I'm trying to compare against you. Stop changing.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. And then I was going to say the flip side to it is when you have the heater mix and you have the master that you're creating and you're comparing it to that because you're saying, I want to master this now, but I want to know what everybody's been listening to all this time because I don't want people to go like, the rough mix sounded better,
exactly,
or whatever, that kind of thing. In that instance, you don't want to level match, right? Because you don't want to turn down the heater mix to yours because the people who are comparing yours to what they've been listening to, this heater mix, they're going to still have a loud version of it, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I think that's good to know, Rockstars, is that like sometimes you want to level match, and then other times when you want to make sure that something is as loud as something else, then you would turn off the level matching, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Hot diggity. Tell us about your mastering studio. So you're in Infrasonics.
Yes.
You're sharing a room with Dan, you said.
Yes.
And who's Dan?
So Dan Bacciagalupi is one of our engineers.
Yes.
He's also currently Pete's assistant. So usually during the day in the studio that we're in, Pete's in his room, Dan is in his room, and then I have my little studio manager lady office. But whenever I have projects, I kick Dan out of his room and we switch. So Dan's room has, like I said, it's a hybrid system. So he's got the Maggie Q4 in there. He's got an E-Tech limiter in there, like a high frequency limiter. He's got a massive passive. He's got all this other random gear that I've never touched because I'm like, that looks like it's going to blow up if I touch that. But at this point, unless I really feel like something needs it, I'm mostly in the box, which is a total 180 from how I started.
Right.
But I feel like it's easier for me with that workflow. And I feel like I can get the results that I want better than when I take things out.
You know, it's funny to think about this idea of analog as the first step towards digital in mixing or mastering, and whether it's, this question of like, do you need to do that anymore? Well, the one place it's always analog first, always, is from speaker to ear.
Yeah.
It's always going to be analog. We always have to learn, like, what does something sound like coming out of a speaker in a room?
Absolutely. It's that, and it's also like the AirPods and everything too. It's like they're so they only have a limited frequency response unless you have the crazy maxes that are doing the thing. But that's what most people are listening to references on now anyway, are AirPods. So it's like they're not going to care if I ran it through a massive passive or not. They're going to be like, does this sound good? Yes or no? Most of the time. Some people are like, ooh, what'd you do?
So you find that some of the subtle moves that are great in mastering don't necessarily translate on earpods or AirPods rather?
Oh, I was just saying like whether or not it's necessary to like run through analog, that kind of thing. It's like the listeners, like you said, it's just speaker to ear. That's all they have. They don't have any perception of like what I did to get there. So it's like, is it necessary? Like if you want, but not really.
Right. There's no absolute reason to use analog. It's just whether it's the right move with the final sound. I mean, there are places where I was really struck by a hi-fi decision having an effect on a lo-fi result.
Yeah.
So for example, there was the question of like, if you work at 44.1, 48, 96, 192, does it matter? It's all going to MP3 anyway. People will say things like that. And then I get it. I understand the point.
Yeah.
But I had a client come in with a 4-track and I had to decide like, well, I'm going to transfer your 4-track tapes into Pro Tools and then we'll work on it from there and make these final mixes and export it. Since it's not that many tracks, I could do a higher resolution.
Yeah.
Which one should I do? And so I did an experiment where I just I just transferred in at 41, 44.1, 48, 96, 192, did no moves and immediately exported a static mix out to MP3. And you could totally hear a difference. The MP3 sounded way better at the high resolutions.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, wow, all right. Now, I don't know if I wish, but I'm not doing records at 192 in my studio.
Yeah.
I'm not even doing them at 96 at the moment just because I learned the hard way that you have to sort of know how many tracks you're going to be working with. Because if you're going to do a bunch of tracks and you need a complex mix, then it's just your computer's going to choke.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting for us because 99% of the time we just get the stereo wave file and that's it. So it could be at 192, it could be at 96, 44, whatever. Like we see everything across the board.
Yeah. Hopefully you don't see MP3s.
No. If we do, we're like, hey, no. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's all this like willy-nilly fighting about like what sounds better and whatever. And I know people will have arguments for things, but I'm like, does it matter? It's gonna sound the same when it goes out on streaming and you're listening to it. Like no one's gonna be like, oh, that came from a 96K file. Like I can tell.
Right. As long as it sounds great, the final result. I mean, again, it's emotion. It's music as emotion, right? It's like if you feel it when you're listening to it, then that's all you need to know.
Exactly.
Do you find that your awareness of that varies in styles of music? Like, are there some styles of music that are more forgiving about things like that than others?
About like the emotion in them?
About like, it doesn't matter how you got there kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think like going back and listening to a lot of like older thrash records, I'm like, it was not about quality. It was about emotion. So
Yeah.
like in that like realm, they don't care. It just wants to be like hot and fast, you know?
Yeah. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
I could never play that drum beat. I still can't play that drum beat.
Yeah. But yeah, I think like if it's something that's supposed to just be an emotional representation, like if it makes you feel something, that's good.
Tell us a little bit more about your studio. So you've got, and again, this is the shared studio with Dan. So what are the monitors like? One of the things that we should bring up is I've noticed at Infrasonics, you guys have Atmos now.
We do.
So tell us about that. What is Atmos? Is it even a part of mastering? Is it only a part of mixing? What's it? You don't have to have all the answers because nobody's got all the answers yet. But how would you describe it now?
So in Dan's room, we have just a stereo pair of B&W monitors, which I also learned on B&Ws at Tommy's. So when Dan was like, "Oh, you can work in my room," I was like, "Yes! I don't have to learn a new pair of speakers."
I love. Are they the B&Ws where the tweeter looks like a turkey drumstick on top of the speaker?
Yes. Which is so funny because I am a big comic book fan, and I watched the Daredevil show that they made with Charlie Cox in it. And in one of the scenes, they pan over Wilson Fisk's apartment, and he has the same pair of monitors that Dan and I have. And I was like, "Oh my God, no way!" I was like, "This is way cool." And
which ones are they? Do you remember
I think
the model
that they're the 800 series.
Yeah.
Let me check.
Yeah.
Let me see.
We'll come back to you with that answer momentarily, rock stars. Yeah, the B&Ws are great. When I think I was, no, I heard them in a few places. I heard them at Alex the Great. They got a pair that really sounded so much fun to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Albini was a big fan of them. He got them and put them in all his studios after going to Abbey Road. And his were like it was a model that doesn't exist anymore. It's it had like octagonal edges or something like that. You know, slightly different shape, I think.
Weird. Yeah, Dan and I do have the 800 series.
800 series,
I was like, I'm pretty sure they are, but I just need to double check myself.
And is it like one driver plus a tweeter, or is it multiple drivers?
I believe it's multiple and then the tweeters as well. Because Dan doesn't have a sub in that room, and it slaps in there, and it's awesome.
Yeah. We
also have the Trinov room correction in there too. Like our room has that, and Pete's room where the immersive setup is. So that's room correction as well. So even though Dan's room is a square, essentially, it sounds really good in there because of the room correction.
Tell the rock stars, what's Trinov and what is room correction? What does that
mean? So Trinov is a company that makes a box, and you put it in your room, and they give you a microphone, and you go and you shoot out.
Cool looking microphone.
Yeah. And you go in and you shoot out your room so that it kind of understands how far away your speakers are, what sort of weird reflections and stuff are happening in the room, at what frequencies. And then through that, they have a little program that shows you a graph of all the different frequencies and where, there's maybe dips or like weird nodes going on. And then it does an EQ to correct those issues. So that's very helpful in Pete's room with the Atmos setup now, where he has 15, 16 speakers in there, whatever it is.
Yeah, you kind of have to have that, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, the Atmos setup is very mind-blowing. So your room with Dan does not have the Atmos in there. Correct, yes.
Okay, but Pete does.
Pete does, and then Reed's studio also has the full PMC Atmos setup. So, yeah, so Pete's room started out as just stereo with a pair of PMCs. And, when Atmos started to become a thing, we were like, let's go full bore. We're going to do it. So we have speakers hanging off the ceilings. They're all around, on the back of his door, on the wall, like all over the place, laser.
Is it trickier to walk into an Atmos studio? You're afraid you're going to bump into something?
Not any more than usual.
Okay, all right.
But yeah, he's got full setup in there. So in our studio here, we only have the Atmos setup. But our studio in LA, Jay Clark has a room set up for Atmos and Sony 360, which also has like height speakers.
Right.
Which is really awesome.
Yeah, it's got speakers underneath you or something.
Yeah,
right?
it's really weird. I don't know how he can feel in that environment. I'm like, I went in there and listened once and I was like, this is so like disorienting, but so cool at the same time. And that's kind of like, for me, what Atmos is. I'm like, this is cool, but also I'm a little confused.
Right.
But it's really awesome. Like Jay did a record called Scream Warriors by the group Lovecraft. And that is the coolest sounding record I have ever heard in Atmos.
Now, did Jay mix it or master it?
He mastered it in
So
Atmos.
this was mastering in Atmos.
Yes. So I believe he mastered it and I believe he mixed it as well. I don't know if it was like him working with other people on the mixing. I don't think so. But it sounds incredible. It's like a spooky Halloween record. And it's like, I listened to it in his room and I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard.
So if, I don't want to put you on the spot with the Atmos thing, because like I said, I know everybody's sort of figuring it out as they go, but if mastering a stereo file means you've got a left channel and a right channel, and you're basically processing those, and then there are tricks like mid-side and things like that that let you process each one differently or the combination in the middle differently. Is mastering Atmos essentially probably, should we think that it's about it in terms of it's kind of the same thing, it's just that you have these left and right beds, but you also have objects, and so you're just addressing each one separately?
So we have to use Pro Tools for that because we do get every individual track in the project, which is kind of nice that we have that flexibility. So if there is something that needs to be done to one particular instrument or something, we can still go in there and do that. I think a lot of people don't think that mastering for Atmos is necessary, and it absolutely is. There are just so many requirements with the length having to master the stereo exactly, having to have certain loudness limitations, which, you know, sometimes we get things in that are right on the money and sometimes they're not. And it really just needs someone like us to go through each thing and just be like a second set of ears. But
right. So you might not have to do tons to it. You might just be making sure that it's done
absolutely.
Right.
And a lot of the time with the beds and objects too, like it comes to us and they have objects where they want them to be. So we don't necessarily go in and be like, this object over here, like kind of like left, right moment, like where is it? But we don't like change any of the panning or anything like that.
You know, it's funny, beds and objects sounds like my first apartment when I started making records. It was literally just a mattress on the floor and boxes and objects in the room, you know, everywhere.
And I think maybe that's where the misconception comes in, that the Atmos mastering isn't necessary because we don't go in and move objects around because we assume that when we get it, that's where they're supposed to go.
Right, because you wouldn't want to change location of something.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think maybe that's why people
Although
don't
mastering stereo files, you can, right? You can sort of change the focus on center items or make things wider.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is focusing more on the left and right.
Yeah. Dan and Pete always give me shit because I love to widen my masters. I'm like, I want it to feel cinematic. I want it to hit me. And they're like, that's a lot. And I'm like, yeah, but I love it and it sounds awesome. And I've never had any complaints. I'm going to keep doing it.
That's great. That's great. Well, I mean, you know, again, it's an emotional thing. And if people hear the final result and they think it's cooler, you know, the widening issue is a curious one because one of the big challenges, I think, just in general in making music is you have some control over the end result and you don't have some control over the end result. You've got like, you can't control whether somebody's going to listen to it on earbuds, a speaker on their iPhone, a big, huge stereo, a car with subs, you know, a big, fancy movie theater living room system. But you also don't have control. There's so much possible processing at the end of the chain now. Like even in my car, it's got like, I forget what they call it. Maybe it's just spatial or something like that. It's or surround or something. And it's a Tesla. And you just put it, you either turn it off, or you put it on auto, or you put it on max. And I feel like it's processing things even if they weren't delivered in Atmos or anything like that.
Interesting.
And TVs will do that. I've had my TV where I was like, man, I can't hear what people are saying. And it's not just because I'm getting older and I have to turn it up loud. And then I look on, I'm like, oh, damn, it like turned on some kind of surround speaker thing. So it's like dropping the middle and making the wides bigger.
That happens to my TV every time. And I'm like, this sounds bad. And then I'm like, there's no way it sounds bad. I think I'm the problem here.
Right. But then it really affects things like thinking you need to do a vocal up mix when you didn't need to do one because it actually just turned down your center.
Yeah.
Tricky stuff. OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB ports. The OWC Thunder Bay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot-swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, a dedicated display port, and an additional backward-compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. I am totally blown away with Isotope Ozone, Rockstars. I've been mastering a lot of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy for me to get a fantastic sound. The mastering assistant will help you get started by measuring your track and suggesting all the settings you need to get a professionally targeted result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like Clarity, Impact, Low-End Focus, Stabilizer, Imager, Exciter, and Spectral Shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You simply adjust the settings to your own taste, and it sounds incredible. And don't get me started on Master Rebalance, which literally lets you reach into the mix and manipulate the vocals, bass, and drums at the mastering stage. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now when I send off the masters for approval, I get comments back like, "Holy shit, pristine, damn good mastering, crystal clear, dude, you're a wizard. Finally, I love my singing, and the drums and bass sound huge." Check out the newest Ozone, RX, and all the other great plugins at isotope.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the second half of the show, aka the Jam Session. Ooh. My guest today is Raelynn Janicke, joining me here at, I need a name for the studio now, RSR HQ or something like that.
Love it.
You know, the new podcast studio. And you ready to jam?
Let's do it.
All right, sweet. So let's see what I want to ask you next about. Tell us about the other part of your role at Infrasonic, which is managing the studio as well.
Yeah.
What have you learned about managing Infrasonic Mastering and managing in general? How many people are you managing?
I always default to the number 10, but I don't actually know if it's that many. There's just that many of us. But it's really great. I love it. I did event management in college, and granted, that's like a little bit of a different thing where it's like planning events and not planning people. But I really love doing that. And I think it's a good outlet for me to still get to work and like interface with people on a daily basis. Like, I'm a very personable human being. I like to work with other people and talk to people. And I think that comes from my bartender background where I'm like, oh, just strike up a conversation with whoever. So it still gives me that like reach out into the world that there are other people out there and it's not just me in my room without windows.
What are some of the things that So being a people person, that's a good skill set because you got to interact with a bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other things that make up managing a multi-room studio? Like, what is managing the studio? What if somebody's like, "Oh, that sounds fun," or "What is that?" You know? How would you even explain it to somebody?
So I kind of think of myself as like the operations manager. So I do all the scheduling for every single engineer. I do invoicing for every engineer, payroll.
And again, Rockstar's reminder, that's a facility here in Nashville, but another one also in LA. So you're managing and scheduling people all the way across the country as well.
Yeah, which is great because they're like on top of it. So I'm like, you're doing this day, and they're there, and I know that they're doing it, and I have that trust in them, which is really nice. But yeah, it's all the billing, scheduling, that kind of stuff. I'm also kind of helping Pete with admin stuff day to day and just making sure that, the business is running smooth. If there's places that we need to like pay more attention to, or like, have conversations with X, Y, and Z about, whether their project's coming up and they want to have a conversation or whatever. It's like keeping Pete on track a lot too, since he is the busiest one.
Right.
So day to day, it's usually me, Pete, and Dan in the house, and then Reed and his assistant Brandon are on the other side. But it's usually, I set up the schedule for the day. Dan and I talk about what needs to get set up, that kind of stuff. And then doing that with every engineer for the day. And I have scheduled calls with every engineer every morning to be like, this is what's on your calendar for today. This is what you have to do. This is where the files are. And each engineer has their own spreadsheet that I'll put all of their project info in. There's little check boxes for them to signify to me that things are happening. I can signify to them that things are happening. And then I also have, for my own sake, a little sticky note system on my computer. So each engineer has their own sticky note. And I kind of limit that to like 2 to 3 week interactions with different clients that reach out, so that I know, hey, I talked to this person a week ago. I haven't heard from them. I'm going to reach back out to them. So,
are you bill collecting too? Is that get put on your plate?
Oh yeah. I'm reaching out to people, shaking trees, being like, where's my money?
These are definitely some of the challenges, but but you're also mastering. So do you sometimes feel like you wish you had one of you to help you, like to manage, so you could just focus on mastering?
I don't know. I have this I was just talking to Pete about this. I have this internal struggle where I'm like, I really love management, and I'm a very I love organization and spreadsheets and getting stuff in order and being boss lady. But then I also love doing mastering, and I'm really happy that right now I get to do both, and I'm not in the position yet where I have to pick one or the other, because I honestly don't know what I would want to do. I think there's a part of me that would want to do mastering full time, but then I lose that outreach into the world where other people are,
Right.
And then I think about doing management, and then I'm like, but I want to work on music. That's the whole point of what I'm doing.
Well, it's funny, the studio life, there are times where I'm really appreciative of getting to do the same task over and over because I can get deeper into that particular task.
Right.
But then there are other times where I really love the fact that it gets broken up, because I get bored of the same thing too much.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I get bored of things very quickly. So having that duality where I can switch between them, I think is what keeps me energized and excited every day.
What are some of the tools that you find really useful to keep everything organized? And do you use special management tools for the studio, or do you just use, Google Docs, this way and that way?
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
So
calendars, stuff like that.
Yeah. So we've always been a Google Calendar fan. That's where I have everything for everyone. Each engineer has their own little color on the spreadsheet, and I'll put them in there on the calendar for whatever, they have going on.
And then for a Google thing, you essentially, what I've learned is you just have an account. So for my studio, the Toy Box Studio, I could go make the Toy Box Studio at gmail.com or something. And then you have all those tools available. Is that sort of the best way to think about using something like that?
Yeah, I think so. So each engineer has their own at Infrasonic Sound email account that is linked to their Google Calendar so they can see it. And then we were using this program called Bitrix, which is a project management system that you can use, but it just wasn't working for everyone's brains. So at that point it was okay, everyone get together. what is the best solution. Like, I'm very happy to always hear what other people have to say. I never want to make decisions that I want to impose on someone that won't work for them, because everyone's brain is different. Everyone processes things a different way. So I try to just always be like, all right, I'm going to call Nick and see what he thinks. I'm going to call, Piper and see what she thinks. And I kind of gather all my information and then make a decision after that. So we ended up just deciding that like Google like spreadsheets would be the best way to do it. And it's been really helpful. Like them like being able to communicate without talking, like, hey, I checked off the box that I have audio. Ray doesn't have to worry about whether I have audio or not. I'm like, cool. Right, I don't even have to ask.
A spreadsheet might have a line that says like audio, and then there's a little checkbox area.
Yep.
So then each project would kind of get its own. I mean, we don't have to get too granular, but this helps because it helps us all think about how to manage stuff. So like there might be a spreadsheet that talks about, that's like an overall view of everything, but then there might be one for each individual project that's just like a template of, you need to check these things every time.
Yeah. So I have columns set up for each engineer where it's like audio received, whether or not it's been prepped, whether it's set up, whether it's been mastered, references, all that stuff. And we have a session form. So anytime that we have a session come in, they fill out the information, and I strip what's on the session form and put it into the spreadsheet. And then I'll copy and paste that session form into that as like a comment as well, so that the engineer can see exactly what the client said in. And then I'll just color block things so that it's like, okay, these 8 songs are part of this one project and they're orange. And then it's, you can just go through the columns from there and make little check marks. And that seems to work pretty well. It seems to be an easy way for them to A, have all of the information about the project, but B, like able to communicate where they're at with it. So, if they mark that references were sent and they were approved, then I can see that and be like, okay, now I know they need to make production masters. I'm going to put it on their calendar for tomorrow. And it's just kind of an easy way to do things without having to call someone every 5 minutes.
You don't want to be talking to everybody all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's time consuming. So, but I do find that's one of the challenges about trying to set up something with a team. So even for recording Studio Rockstars, I have a couple of assistants. I've had up to a few, 3 or 4 at a time before. And it's really empowering to team up on things and delegate, but it can be very challenging to relax and go like, oh, is the thing getting done? Did the thing get done? Are they on it or not? So talk a little bit about what are some tricks to make sure that where does that happen? Where does it stress you guys out that you're not sure if so-and-so knows that they're supposed to be doing it and they're doing it?
Yeah.
And how you solve those things.
Yeah. So it's easy with Pete and Dan because I can just yell through the wall and be like, Dan, are you still doing this thing? And then he'll yell back. Or with Pete, I'll just go and be like, hey, it's the end of the day. Did X, Y, and Z get done? So that's the easy part. The hard part is, the LA guys and being like, hey, I have this on your schedule for today. Like, what's going on? So that's why I have scheduled calls every morning with each engineer, so that I can check in and be like, hey, this is on your calendar for today. Like, this was on there yesterday. Did it get done? If not, tell me why, so that we can bump it to today. So it's just like, it seems like a lot of over communication, but I feel like that's the only way to keep all the plates spinning in the air.
I feel like I've heard that in business stuff where they talk about like, standing meetings at beginnings of days and things like that. And my brother runs a music school in Brooklyn, and I know that I don't know that they have daily meetings. They have some system for that. Yeah. But they definitely have weekly meetings and stuff like that with different management teams. So it's just that good reminder that part of a system, like you probably do have to close the loop and have some sort of consistent meeting. Yeah. To really know that you're on the same page. Yeah.
And
even
then
if
that's
it's
helpful.
A quick daily.
Yeah. And
so
that's
like how long is
it?
How much time is required for a quick daily meeting with people? Like a 10-minute meeting or something?
Well, I usually just call them in the morning and just kind of check in or whatever. Sometimes they're, 5 minutes like, hey, I don't have anything for you today. Like, this is on your schedule. I'll talk to you later. Let me know if you have problems. And then sometimes like Nick and I have a tendency to get on the phone and then we talk for like 45 minutes about a bunch of shit that doesn't matter. Right. So it depends. It kind of depends on the day. But it's usually just to check in like, hey, here's what I have for you. tell me what you have for me. This is what's on your calendar. Let it rip. Let it go.
Yeah.
And I think like that's something that I love about Infrasonic so much is that I feel like we're all very self-motivated. So I don't really have to like babysit too much, which is really nice.
Right. It's not that kind of management.
Yeah. I just call and check in, and I'm
like middle management where you go like,
I'm like, what's up? How you doing? You good? Okay, cool. Bye.
You got time to stand around and you should have a rag in your hand.
Yeah. You got time to lean. You got time to clean.
Yeah, that's what I knew there was a saying around it, and I knew you'd have it.
That's my restaurant background. I'm just like, oh, don't say it again.
Time
no.
to lean is time to lean is time to clean. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And then, other tools that I find helpful, but not as, you don't get the feedback loop of a meeting. A meeting is like somebody says like, did you get the thing? They go, yep, I got the thing. You're like, cool, awesome. We're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
That's valuable. But all the screen sharing stuff. So I use a little tool called Droppler. Loom is the same idea where you can kind of walk through something on the screen and walk and talk, and you get your camera on you, and then you just send the video file to somebody and they see it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that stuff's really useful. But again, you don't have the closed feedback loop where they're like, okay, got it. But it is a great way, I find, for me to explain something to somebody on my own time. In fact, that's why I was still in the studio when you were arriving here.
Oh, I love that.
Is I was doing a walkthrough video on a mix template for a buddy of mine that I'm working with. So, that stuff is really cool. All the tools we have for managing a studio is really fascinating to me. It's funny that you can use these same tools like Google Docs if you're doing something all by your lonesome, or if you're doing it with a team of 10 people.
Yeah.
And it can really be handy. I know for doing stuff by myself, one of the challenges is sometimes you do something and then you won't need to do it again until 6 months from now.
Yeah.
And then you come back to it and you're like, God, how did I do that?
Yeah.
So I'll make a lot of explainers for myself.
I love that. I last year sat down and wrote an operations manual for the whole business, and it was like 30 pages long. But I was like, if I get hit by a bus, someone needs to know how to
That's
do
great.
this.
Yeah. Now, did you get some business training in school as well? I mean, or does this all come from your kind of computer and engineering background?
I think, honestly, a lot of it came from that management job that I had in college, where it was just like, cool, you have to talk to vendors, you got to like be there, you got to plan everything out, rent the rooms, whatever. And I think that having to be so organized really translated more than I thought it would into this. So when Pete hired me, he was like, hey, I know that you want to be a mastering engineer, but we really need someone to be studio manager too. Do you want to do both? And I was like, dude, I'll do whatever you want. I'll wash your car. I'll shine your shoes. Like, just give me a job. So
hey, car washing is so bad you're out in the sunshine. It's nice out.
I'm like, my roommate just got one that's like attaches to a pressure washer. And it's
shine
like,
your shoes.
I was like, ooh, but like at that point, like, cause I was 25 or something. And I was just like, I just want to like, Pete was someone I always looked up to. So him calling me and being like, do you want a job? I'm like, dude, I'll do whatever. Like, hell yeah. So I just kind of went into it and was like, I'm just going to figure it out. So
nice.
I feel like the business side of things has been coming to me as I've been doing it, which is cool.
Well, it really is. It's similar in a way to mastering. So mastering and record making is about learning how to assemble parts carefully so that you end up with this beautiful thing at the end.
Yes.
And the business side of stuff, there's a lot of parallels. It can be really fascinating to assemble all the bits and then it worked. And you're like, woohoo. And
exactly. I'm like, woo!
Especially when money, number goes up in dollar, bank account. Then you're like, oh, that worked.
I'm like, all right, things are going all right.
Yeah. Atom Audio introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings to allow you to customize your Atom Audio monitors to your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredible incredibly popular A7X. Mid-size rooms and narrow spaces will love the low profile of the A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true three-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a three-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the Atom audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common? They all need incredibly cool sounds that instantly transport the music to the style that they want. This is why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit with a massive library of sounds. Whether you want to create hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, pumping dance floor beats, or full orchestral arrangements, Native Instruments Complete Bundle offers you everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to wild synths, ultra-realistic strings, and vintage electric bass, guitars, and keys. The list goes on and on. I personally love recording real bands in my studio and adding cool drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. Plus, it's super fun to create a string section for a rock band. Come on, go get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Some restrictions apply. All right, well, thank you for talking about the management side of things. Maybe we'll talk more about that. But what is mastering to you?
Yeah.
So if you want to do more mastering, what is it?
I always make the joke that I'm an audio janitor. But like you said, it's assembling parts so that it can go out into the world as a finished project. We're like the gatekeepers. We're the last people that touch it before it goes out in the world. So it's got to be appropriate volume. It's got to sound like it's supposed to sound to the best of our ability, and whatever format. So if it's, streaming, vinyl, CD, immersive, whatever it may be, like, we have to make sure all of that is consistent. So when it all goes out, it makes sense living together.
And then does that imply that there are multiple songs in a mastering process, or can mastering be a single song?
It can be a single, it can be an EP, LP, it can be anything. And I think that's the misconception a lot about, companies like Infrasonic or Sterling or like Georgetown, like the bigger ones, that it's like, oh, you guys probably don't do like singles, or like you don't work with indie clients. And I'm like, we will do whatever comes through the door. Like, for us, at least, like, our whole philosophy is we're doing this because we want to help people. And that's, I think, what draws us all together so much, is that, like, that's our goal, like, if it's an indie client that has never had something mastered before and they want to work with Pete and there's like, no way I can afford that, I'm like, just talk to me. Like, we'll figure it out. Like, he wants to do it. You want him to do it. So, like, make it happen.
You just want Ray to master it.
Yeah. I'm like, yeah.
Take it to Ray.
Hey. Yeah.
Hey,
but
take it to Ray.
Yeah. But that's our thing. Like, we want to be as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, whether it's a one-off single, something that someone's been working on for 20 years, that's like their life's work in an LP. Like, we just want to do everything, Yeah. It's so crazy to us that we get to do this as a job. So I'm always like, give us whatever you got. Like, keep giving us a job to do.
What are your thoughts about the mastering process versus other aspects of record making, particularly in terms of the amount of music that comes across your desk, So when you're mastering, is it safe to say you're going to be making a lot more records than if you're mixing or if you're producing?
That's kind of the benefit of mastering, is like, we get new things across our desk every single day. It's always something different, which I love. Like, I just don't have the brain for mixing. That is not how my brain works. And I think because I get bored of things so fast, I'd be like, I've been working on this thing for 3 months and it sucks and I hate it. But with mastering, I'm like, okay, I did this record yesterday. Today I'm doing like, some foreign language EP, and then tomorrow I'm doing a pop single. Like, it keeps things so interesting because it's so different all the time.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Well, there's that whole concept too of, if you take two groups of people and you tell one group, we want you to paint one perfect painting versus the other group, we want you to paint 100 paintings.
Yeah.
And, then the idea is that the group that painted 100 paintings ends up with far greater paintings than the group that just tried to make one great one. So I think there's a lot of benefit in getting to do a lot of things over and over again. And again, it's that like idea of like doing the same task.
Yeah.
You really do get an understanding of it, and you get to, understand, you train your ear, and that you probably really can tell when something sounds good.
Oh, yeah.
And when it doesn't, just because you hear so much stuff.
And it's so crazy too, because it's like, even though I work on things that can be so drastically different day to day, like I always learn something from it. Like, oh, I did, this EQ move on this track that I think would have really helped what I did yesterday. And it just teaches you stuff as you go along. And that's also, I think, what I love about it is like, I don't ever want to stop learning. Like, I want to learn something every single day. And when you're faced with totally different music every day, you kind of just have to be like, okay, what am I doing now?
What kind of stuff are you learning right now?
Ooh, okay. So the townhouse compressor that I mentioned earlier, I'm very sparse with my compression in my mastering because, like I said, I really want to just honor what I'm given, but sometimes it just really works. And that's something that I've been using a lot lately and trying to see how far I can really push things into that. And then when I'm like, okay, girl, back it off.
Who makes the townhouse compressor?
Brainworks.
Brainworks. Okay, that's Plug-in Alliance. Is that right?
I use the Plug-in Alliance one. Yeah.
Yeah. Groovy.
Yeah.
I haven't done that. What is Townhouse like a famous studio? Does that come from a particular studio? Do you know?
I don't know where that comes from, actually.
Sounds British to me.
Yeah, it kind of does. I live in a townhouse. But oh my God, that thing is so awesome. So when I worked with Tommy, we had a pair of the FET2 compressors, and I loved using those because they're just so gritty and dirty, and like I just love that vibe. And I feel like the townhouse compressor totally scratches that itch for me, where it's like super gritty and dirty, and I'm like, let's go.
So when we say things like gritty and dirty, is this like kind of like using an 1176 where you get some attitude out of the compression versus the massive passive, which is maybe, I don't know how you describe that one. I imagine that's got more like subtle warmth and harmonic, richness, but you're not like, when you use something like that, oh wait, massive passive is the EQ, right?
It's an EQ, but
Right,
it's the same kind of thing where it's like, I know if something is like kind of like brittle or harsh, I know if I run it through the massive passive, those tubes are going to warm it up,
right,
and it's just going to soften all those edges.
Yeah. But the Very-Mu, that's what I'm thinking of too, right?
Yes.
So that would be one where you are trying to hear the needle moving and the pumping, or you're not so much. Or is that just a wrong question to ask?
No, that's not the wrong question at all. I think once I hear the pumping, I'm like, okay, girl, back it off. but in general, I try not to impose so much that you can hear any of the pumping on it. I think it's more of a vibe thing for me with that specific compressor, because even if I push it super hard, I don't hear a ton of pumping. It just makes it sound more like rock and roll. Like it brings out more of the like low mid grittiness kind of stuff. And occasionally it does do a little bit of like a mid-range push, which I usually like anyway.
Right.
So then I don't have to do as much of it in my EQ because it's already happening in the townhouse compressor, which is really awesome. I think because I was a singer growing up too, I'm very mid-range focused because I'm like, give me the words. I want to hear the words.
Yeah, totally.
But
well, I mean, the music is in the mids. It really is. I mean, it's one of the things that is why I like to check balances, just turn it way down, listen to it on the Auratone and mono, is because I think you're just hearing, it's like, will this sound right on the clock radio when it wakes you up in the morning?
Right.
It's all mids,
And it's so crazy too how many mixes we get in that I always check it in stereo and I check it in mono just to see what it sounds like.
Do you check it in mono on the big speakers?
Oh, yeah.
Do you? Do you ever check it? Do you ever put it on the big speakers and mute one of them and put it in mono, so you're just getting it out of one speaker?
So Dan has the Mass Select console, so you can do left, right, mono, and stereo. So you can kind of go through and do it that way.
Okay. And so this, again, I got to ask the dumb question.
Yeah.
So you said that you use Trinov to tune the room.
Mm-hmm.
When you're switching from stereo to mono, does that mess up the Trinov or anything like that? Or no, it doesn't. It just still sounds groovy.
She still sounds groovy, which is great. Trinov is insane technology.
Yeah.
I'm like, I've used the SonarWorks stuff before, which is great if you don't have money to spend on Trinov stuff, which like I don't.
Yeah.
But it's just so awesome. But even when you sum everything to mono, it still sounds great. But so often, we get stereo mixes in that when I sum everything to mono and I'm monitoring that way, things just completely cancel out. Like they're out of phase.
Right,
and it's like, oh, there are no electric guitars happening. And I'm like, when this goes and is playing on someone's Alexa, there are going to be no guitars happening.
Yeah. So let's ask that question. So that is an appropriate time to check that stuff is mixing.
Yes.
When you're making those decisions. When you discover that those decisions were overlooked in mixing, are there some instances where you can help that in mastering? Are there places where you can rephase things that were out of phase in the left and right?
I think where things get tricky with that is, at least for me, is me wanting to make things wider. So it limits what I can do with my width control, which really, like, I can't open things up as much as I want to because I'm already having phase issues where it's already, sitting. So if I do see that happening before I dive into actually mastering the track, usually I'll reach out to the engineer and just be like, hey, like, I just wanted to let you know, like, I can work with this. But when I sum to mono, your electric guitars disappear.
Yeah.
And that's actually been something that I've had people be like, oh my God, that's crazy. And now they always check their mixes in mono because like, I don't know, like people don't think about it because why would you when you're in the middle of mixing something?
Yeah. And before you knew it, there's so many things that we learn along the way. And, before we knew it, we just didn't know.
Exactly.
I had stuff like that happening. And an engineer showed it to me and I was like, whoa, I had no idea these. Or he actually showed me that I sent him 4 tracks of guitar and 2 of them were the same track. So they were mono. And I was like, oh, sorry.
You're like, my bad. But that's the thing. It's like, how would you know that unless you encountered it, Yeah.
But the funny thing about that is, and then let's over-explain this a little bit. So Rockstars, we're talking about if things on the left and right, on the sides, are out of phase from each other, it can sound very wide in stereo, but when you hit that mono button, they add up together and they actually cancel each other out, so you end up with nothing. The trick is there's stuff where you can do that by accident and you're going to lose it if it sums to mono, and that's a bad thing. But that's also how you get things to sound wide. Is phase stuff that is out of phase. So it's very fascinating. And, it seems like sometimes there are effects that sound really wide, but they still sum to mono. And sometimes there are effects that are wide and don't. What are some stuff you've learned about that? Have you seen records that you notice something gets lost, but when you listen to it in stereo, it's so cool that you're like, who cares?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't remember what record we worked on, but it was like a bigger record we'd work on maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. And as soon as we got the mixes, we noticed that every single one of them on this LP, when you sum to mono, the electric guitars cancel out. But it was so impactful in stereo that when we had reached out to the engineer, they were like, just roll with it. It's fine. And, like most of the time people aren't listening in mono. If it's like a little Bluetooth speaker or like an Alexa or whatever, you're not really going for quality. You're just playing something in the background most of the time. So it's like, does it really matter though? But I think it matters, but it's not worth having to go back and redo everything because that happens.
Don't undo the art.
Exactly.
If the art is good, don't undo the art. But so let me ask you this aspect of the question. There's also a concept of like mono block. So for example, I have a pair of Atom audio speakers that are off to the side and they're just right next to each other intentionally, not separated out. And I'll listen to the mix that way too, because I'll get what essentially feels like mono, but because I'm not mono summing it, it's not really doing the cancellation out on the left-right stuff.
Interesting.
But I don't know. But is it? That's the question. Like
I don't
if the
know.
two speakers are right next to each other, does it still kind of cancel out a little bit or not? There's also the idea that, if you walk out of the room and walk into the other room, you might have had stereo in the room, but by the time it comes through the door to where you are, it's now some mono version of that, and how does that matter and stuff?
That'd be a fun, little experiment to do, because I've never tried that before. I'm like, ooh, that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Just put them next to each other and see if they still cancel out, if it's still two separate speakers.
That came to me from Jamie Tate. He would take two NS10s and he'd flip them tweeters on, one tweeter on top is on the left, tweeter on the bottom's on the right.
Yeah.
And they were just sitting right on top of each other. So nothing stereo at all. It's just like a mono block.
That's awesome.
But he pointed out that because you're still sending it to stereo speakers, the reverbs don't necessarily cancel out. Mm-hmm. Whereas if they were phasing things and you summed a mono, they cancel out. So it's all fascinating. And I think it's worth just listening to all this stuff. It's, the funny thing is, in the same way that there's not an absolute answer to production, mixing, and mastering, because you can't control the end result.
Yeah.
People are going to experience it in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. Same thing with, checking these phase questions in mono and stereo. It's like, there isn't an absolute answer because you don't know how somebody's going to listen to it. You're just trying to hit that cross section.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny.
Great averagers. Right?
Yeah. It's so funny too, because I remember when I first moved here and started working with Tommy, and he was like, I really think that you have mastering years. You should do this. I was like, sure, whatever, because I was 23 and had no idea. But I remember watching him master one day and being like, so how do you know what to do? What are the steps? And he was like, well, it depends on what you're listening to. And I was like, okay, but what's the solution? And he was like, that's not how it works. And I was just my brain was like, there just has to be a way to do it. And he's like, no, it's every project. And I was like, damn, that sucks not having an answer, but I get it.
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session, close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. All right, so that does take us right to another question, a couple of questions, but the idea of AI. So that obviously is a big topic in all sorts of fields right now.
Yes.
But it's been around for a minute when it came to mastering, because we've for years now, for a good 8 years or something like that, right? At least.
Yeah.
We've had this ability to say oh, you can upload your file and it just masters it and sends it back. And the reason I think this is tied into what you just said is that, the idea that there's an answer to a question.
Right.
So what are your thoughts about that? And when I say answer to a question, I need to explain myself. The answer to the question meaning, here's this song, what's the right answer for how it's supposed to sound next mastered, What are your thoughts on all that? What is AI mastering? what other thoughts do you have on AI? Is it a threat to music making, or is it a new tool that's there to help us?
Yeah. I don't know. I think I have the mindset that I'm like, I spent years honing in this craft to treat every project with the amount of respect that it deserves, and also like with whatever audio treatment it deserves too. And I feel like that's something that, there's no just one trick solution for. You really have to sit with every single thing and see what serves it the most. And I feel like having AI do that pulls the emotion out of it, because a lot of what I do is like, oh man, when I did this EQ move, it made me like feel emotional listening to this or whatever. And you don't have that with AI. You don't have someone that spent years of their life honing in this craft and that they put their passion and energy into it. It's like, yeah, it's cheap and you can throw it up and, get something back same day, but it's like, it's not, I just don't think it's going to have the same feel. I actually recently, Reed's assistant, Brandon, was mixing for one of his clients, and he was like, Ray, I saw that their reference said it was from Lander, and I really want you to just show them like what you can do. And I was like, I'll do it for free just to prove them wrong. So I did it, and they ended up loving it. And that's the thing. It's like, yeah, you can do it and throw it up on the internet and get something back. But it's like, wouldn't you rather work with someone that like, this is what they love to do, and like have someone treat your baby like a baby and not like throw your baby into a machine?
Oh my goodness. I love it. So, hearing you talk about working with somebody, that is one of the things that I think is at the core of what we do. For me, music is about working with people.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're sitting in a new podcast HQ studio, having an interview face to face, making records. Well, what makes it, I mean, there's a lot that I enjoy on my own too, because I think those are just moments that I need to do something by myself. But most of making records, is something that is just interacting with people.
Absolutely.
It's the whole reason I want to do it. I mean, it's like I like playing music in a band at the same time with other people.
Yeah.
And which is challenging because I'm also a huge fan of EDM. But I think EDM doesn't exist without people, because I think the creation of it and what makes it really good is how people listening respond to it and hit a dance floor and all that kind of stuff. So,
and I think that's part of our job too, is like being open to all genres. It's like, that was one of the first things Tommy taught me. He was like, have you ever listened to this? No, go home and listen to it. He's like, you need to expand what you're listening to and not just like the same stuff you've been listening to since you were 13. So I feel like he really changed me on that, where I'm like, I'll throw on like a bossa nova playlist while I'm making dinner, and then I'll get in the car and like blare Deftones or something, like it's always so funny to me when I look at my like Spotify mix and it's like Spice Girls and then like Slipknot and then like, some weird like Ella Fitzgerald record from like 1964,
Yeah.
Some weird stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm so happy for that.
Do you remember starting out and having music that you thought you didn't like until you started to study it as a engineer?
Oh, yeah.
And you grew a new appreciation for it?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I think also, as I've gotten older, my music taste has mellowed out a little bit, and I'm not such like a ragey, angry teenager anymore, which I still love all that music. But now I can really appreciate, like when I go in and I listen to, like a jazz record or like I just did this record that was in a totally like foreign language from a different country. And I'm like, how cool is that I get to do that, instead of me being like, well, I wouldn't want to listen to this thing. I'm like, this is so cool. I can't wait to listen to it. Like, I think it really changed my perspective that like, all the music is like somebody's baby, like don't disrespect the baby.
Don't throw the baby into the machine.
Don't throw the baby into the machine. I think I just have a way deeper appreciation for the music making process now that I'm like in it. So,
speaking of AI, I've been entertaining myself on some of the podcasts by going over to ChatGPT and saying, what should I ask Ray on this podcast interview? So Let's see what artificial intelligence
Let's
thinks
see
about
what she
we
serves
do, huh?
up for me.
What do you think are some common misconceptions about mastering?
Oh my God. Come on, Chat GPT. I think a lot of it is that people think that we just make things louder, which we don't. I mean, we do, but we do a lot more than that. A lot of it is like EQ, compression. We do all of the deliverable formats for CD, vinyl, immersive, everything. And, it's really about us kind of putting everything together and making a cohesive unit that goes out into the world for everyone to enjoy. So it's like, if it weren't for us, you could have one song hitting like -10 RMS and one hitting -2, and it wouldn't make a difference because it's just out in the world willy-nilly. But if you have a mastering engineer, it's going to all be equal playing field. You can sit and just listen and close your eyes, and it is one cohesive experience. And I'm like, oh, that's so great.
How crucial is it for the mastering engineer to be the first person to enjoy the record in order for the next person to enjoy it?
Oh, I think 100%. If I'm not happy, then I'm like, I don't feel confident giving this off to other people because, like, if I don't think it's good, they're not going to think it's good, which is also like a very egotistical perspective to have. But it's true. Like, I want to have that full confidence when it goes out that I'm like, I did my best on this, and I really think it's like ready to roll.
Yeah. All right. So you ready for the next one?
Let's do it.
Let's see what Chat GPT wants to know about mastering. Maybe we already answered this, but let's ask it again. What is your process for approaching a mastering project? How does it differ depending on the type of music or audio you're working with?
Oh my God. I love this. So just to kind of go step by step.
Wait, are we
through it.
training the artificial intelligence?
I'm like, no, robots, no.
Chat GPT, you're not allowed to listen to this podcast.
So mastering for me kind of starts out with me just sitting in Dan's room and playing some music that I'm familiar with so I can kind of get my bearings in the room before I start. And then I'll load up the session for, whatever, it's a single, EP, whatever. And I'll just sit and I'll listen through to everything without any processing, just like the raw mixes that I get so that.
Not even level adjustments yet?
Nope, just full blown, just listening to exactly what I got for raw material. And from there, it can kind of give me an idea of like which ones need to have their level adjusted, which ones, need certain treatment that I'm like, oh, okay, I can kind of like give myself a blueprint for like what I'm going to do. So it kind of gives me time to sit and absorb what the project is and also kind of map out my moves. So then
does that require listening to the complete song and the complete album from start to finish? Or does it allow you to kind of like go and get samples and get a feel for each song?
Yeah. I think when it's a single, I'll listen to the whole thing all the way through. Same with EPs because they're usually not too long. If it's an LP, I'll listen to most of a song, skip, go to the next one, just kind of like jump around.
It's time consuming.
Exactly.
Part of mastering is like, we got to get this done by lunch or whatever.
And usually it's like, we're the last step. So it's usually already a week late by the time that we get it. So they're just like, right now, let's go.
Right now.
Yeah. But
you didn't hear that lyric in the third verse.
Yeah. I'm like, okay. But from there, I'll just kind of dive in. I'll usually start on the first song just to kind of get like a rough ballpark of where I want things. And most of the time it starts with me doing some sort of like width control, which I usually only do a little bit. Even the boys make fun of me for it. And then I'll do some sort of like high frequency limiting, whether it's a de-esser or I'm using just some sort of like the E-Tech high frequency limiter that we have. I love that because it's very just like soft. It's not very heavy handed. And then I'll throw that airband on my Mag EQ4. I'll do some EQ and then usually the Townhouse compressor as well. And that always kind of changes. So I usually also have a pair of just like an emulation of transformers that it'll run through too, just since I'm not taking it out of the box most of the time. I want that vibe still.
And those are plug-in transformers as well.
Yes.
It's so amazing that all these things exist as plug-in.
It's so crazy.
Even the Mog 4, even though you guys might have the analog unit, the plug-in's still useful.
Yeah. It's pretty much the same. I won't say it's exactly the same.
No, none of them are exactly the same.
But it's close enough that I'm like, that's exactly what I'm using this for.
Right. And I met those guys out at NAMM too.
They're so sweet. They're sweet babies. Love you, Mag people. But a lot of the time too, since I do only have, general control of things, only having the stereo mix that I get, I'll sometimes, if I really need it, throw in the isotope rebalance too. Like if I feel like the vocals aren't coming out enough, but I don't want to have to be like, oh, can you send me a vocal up version or whatever? Like me just doing a mid-range bump is not bringing out the vocals enough. I'll throw the rebalance on there and bump it up like 0.1 dB, and I'm like, there it is. Like it just,
nice.
it's a lot of kind of figuring out what tools to use how to get me where I need to go.
Have you found that the other instrument elements in isotope rebalance can be useful too? Like, does it bring out the kick and snare?
Yeah. So I believe it has vocal, bass, and drums as the ones that you can adjust, whether you want to boost or cut. And most of the time I'm boosting a vocal, or if I get something that's like slamming hot vocals, I just pull it down a little bit. And then that gives room for everything else to live. So if there's a lot of stuff in the same frequency range that's just overlapping, if you cut back the vocal a little bit, that'll leave some more room for the other instrumentation to come out. But most of the time, that's usually just what I use it for. But if I was like, ooh, I need a little bit more bass, I don't think that would be my go-to. I think if it needed some more body, I would probably use the back EQ and just bump it up a notch. So it's kind of like pick and choosing your battles of like, okay, this could work, but I think this other thing would work better. And it's just a lot of like fooling around and trying different stuff. And that's kind of the beauty of, us being in a room without windows all day is like, I could sit in there and like try whatever I want. And it's not that, one thing is working and like everything else is failing. It's like, oh, how does this sound? How does this sound? Like, I'm glad that I have the freedom to try different things, even if it's not necessarily what I end up going with. I still was able to like mess around and see what
now when you try stuff, are you always like constantly level matching for tries of things, or do you sort of train your ear to listen around louder is better?
Yeah, I think I kind of listen around. Gain staging is a lot of what mastering is a lot of the time, and there's a couple different ways to do it in WaveLab where it can be like pre or post processing, which is cool. But most of the time, if I'm going through and trying different things, whatever I'll do, I use the FabFilter Q3 EQ. And, if I'm like, I like where this EQ is sitting, but I just want to try one thing. They have a function where you can copy that and it's like A, B, and you can go back and forth. Yeah. And then you have the A as your original thing that you're confident in. But then you can go to B and mess around and kind of go back and forth with those.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily like having to level match each thing through the song, but it's like kind of just comparing things at the same level and being like, okay, do I like this better? Do I not like this better? So.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's see. How about this one? How do you balance the technical precision with artistic interpretation when mastering a track or album?
Ooh.
So I guess that's a little bit of the question of like, is there even a separation or balancing going on of like, the technician versus the artist when you're mastering?
I definitely think so. I think in general, like I said, my philosophy is very like, I just want to honor the integrity of what I have. And it's not about me being like, oh, when people hear this, they're going to know I did it. Because I'm like, this isn't my project. That's not my place to do that. And I know that some people do feel that way. But for me personally, that's not what I'm going for. So I think a lot of the times I just focus on like, okay, what do I think this needs? Like, how can I get there? What do I need to achieve? Instead of me being like, oh man, I would really like listening to this if I, bumped the vocals up way in front of everything else and could hear them and nothing else or whatever. So I think a lot of it is just the technical side of my brain, which is also why I think I'm more drawn to mastering than mixing. I think mastering's a little bit more of like I said, the audio janitor, like technical cleanup process for me. But there are times where, if I'm listening to something and comparing it to other things in that genre and I feel like it's lacking something, then I feel like I take the artistic directive to be like, okay, well, if I play it against this, it's not, the low end doesn't feel as impactful. So I'm going to go in with the back EQ and bump it up a notch. And then it feels like it can live in that world competitively. So I think that's where the creative side comes in for me, is when I'm making sure that it makes sense in the genre and it doesn't feel like it's lacking anything. But otherwise, it's all just me being technical and being like, all right, here are the problems. Here's how I'm going to fix it. and now it sounds like how it sounds in my head.
That's interesting. So it's as if you're saying there's more technician than artist at the mastering stage because, the artistry has hopefully been decided upon, and now it's about like making sure it,
Yeah. I think that's at least my mentality on it. Yeah. Is that like, when it gets to me, like the engineer and the artist have already had that conversation, have already worked to get that to that point. They've worked with the mix engineer to get it to that point. And when I assume that when I get it, it's how they intend for it to sound. And I'm just polishing it.
Awesome. All right, here, I'm just looking at a couple of the last questions. How about this one? In your experience, what do you think are some of the most important qualities for a successful mastering engineer to possess?
Ooh, I think number one is being able to work with people and customer service, because that's essentially what it is. We're offering a service to people, and we want to work with people that we like and like be friends with and form those relationships, because that's what this job is all about, So that for me is like number one, just like being a good hang, being cool with people, being able to really connect with people on a deeper level than just like, cool, send me your mix. All right, here's your master. Thanks a lot. I really want to have some sort of connection with that person.
Right.
I think in general too, like being flexible, like being open to critique, being open to learning new things, knowing that, just because this is the way you've done something in the past doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it. Like, I think being malleable is really important too. And also just like, I don't know, I feel like Nashville's really special, that the community here, like mixing, mastering, tracking, everything, everyone is so supportive, and like everyone is friends with everybody, like there's not all that like weird competition. Like everyone just wants to help each other out. And I think that's such a strong piece of this community, is like everyone is just so like, high tides float all boats kind of thing.
Yeah, nice. High tides float all boats. This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. What's the balance between people coming to the studio for the mastering session being in Nashville versus everything's sort of communicated remotely?
Yeah. We don't really get attended sessions. I think because our process is so quick, it's sometimes hard for people to come in and be like, okay, here's your single. You listen to it for 5 minutes and then you're on your way. But a lot of the times if it's like an LP or something.
If it was my single, I'd want to hear it.
Yeah. But we're always open to it.
Is that Freedom Rock?
Yeah.
Turn it up.
Like, woo! We're always open to attended sessions, but I feel like, by that point, people are just like, let's go, get it out. And it's not so much about like being there to do any sort of tweaks or anything like that. But it happens every so often. But we always have people just, even if it's not attended and people just want to come through and say hi, I'm like, just come knock on the door. Like, we're in there.
Yeah. How about this? So with that in mind too, what advice would you give to somebody who's interested in pursuing a career in mastering?
Yeah.
Does this imply that you can be anywhere and do it? Or do you think that it's still valuable to, or necessary? I know it's valuable, but do you think it's still critical to be in a music city to do it?
Yeah. I personally think it's incredibly worth it to be here. Like, I loved living in Boston. I love being up there. It's so beautiful and you're so close to the ocean, which is great. But like, I could not just start a mastering career there. Like the music scene there is just not bumping enough. There's not enough people up there doing it to really have that sense of community or like find a mentor even. So I'm really happy that I ended up coming down here because I was able to find a mentor. I was able to connect with other people in the community. Like, I really think it's not necessary to live in a music city, but I think it is so much better when you have that opportunity.
So you feel like when you moved to Nashville, you just met a lot more people that are making records?
Oh, yeah. 100%. Now it's like everyone I talk to is like people I've met through work or, is a friend of a friend that's working on this record or whatever. And I'm like, I didn't have any of that in Boston because there's no community there.
What about the artist side of it? What about the band side of it? Like when you were in New York and Boston, you still were seeing all these cool bands that were coming through and touring, playing shows. You're tapping into that sense of community. Do you feel like that still exists and thrives in a place like Nashville? Or do you feel like that sort of exists everywhere in the country and Nashville is just a thriving, like for, the making the record part?
Yeah. I think we're just a little thriving bubble for the making the music part, which is great because then it's good for us to be able to be like, oh, this artist who I really like is playing a show. I'm going to go and meet them and strike up a conversation and do that thing. Where it's like, if I was living in the middle of Nebraska or something, I was like, well, there's no way I'm going to meet someone at a show here,
right.
So I think it's the accessibility that I think is so invaluable.
And you're still getting all the cool punk rock coming through and all that kind of stuff?
I'm getting a lot of it, which is great. My partner's a mix engineer and he works like in a ton of like punk and metal stuff. And he's like the drummer of a punk band.
Oh,
so
nice.
he always like sends his clients my way and I'm like, let's go.
What are the clubs in Nashville where your favorite kind of rock and punk rock bands come through?
Honestly, some of the best shows I've seen here have just been house shows.
Love it.
And it's so great because, the one punk venue in town, The End or whatever, you go there and it's like people aren't really dancing, they're not having fun, they're not letting loose. But then you go to these house shows, like his band just played a show like a couple nights ago at a house show and there were kids like dancing, like there was just so much like it was so much more of a community feeling there.
Yeah.
Because people aren't like afraid of like, oh, I'm going to dance and I'm going to look stupid. Like those kids were like, we are having a blast. And I'm like, that's so awesome. Let's go.
I got to see some house concerts when I was in college. I remember like people would, they'd throw a party in their basement of their apartment building and stuff like that. And they were always so awesome.
It's so much fun.
They're so awesome. And I know they go on around here, but I do feel like sometimes you got to be either, 20 or you got to somebody who's 20 and needs to invite you.
Yeah. It was so crazy. Me and one of my friends went to the show the other night and like, she's like 26 or 27 and I'm 29 and we went and it was like, woo, I'm having a real college experience in here. It was like the first time I ever used a keg in my life. I was like, what am I doing here? But it's so much fun. But it gives me hope that like, the young kids are like still into stuff like that. Yeah. And that it's not, dying off with the younger generations. I'm like, oh no, there's still kids out there
said the 29-year-old. I love it. All right, so we are coming up on the end of our time, but I didn't get a chance to really dive into the specifics of your discography. So I've got it in front of me now. Let me see if I can ask you a couple of closing questions.
Yeah.
They sort of put it in that context. So stuff that I made some notes about, like love songs, Edwin Boulevard, electronic pop production, Where Do We Stand, Christina Sarah was in there, Sweet Tooth remixes, which was sort of EDM focused. And then Tommy Wiggins records, Postcard from Cape Ann, these sort of analog-y things. And In the Streets, Arlo, funk track too. So maybe let me throw that all into one big group and just say, when you're working on stuff that's like electronic pop music, records that start with a laptop and then a vocal mic, or you're working on EDM where you got to make sure the bass drop happens, otherwise people don't dance on the dance floor. And the analog stuff, and then the live band stuff, like In the Streets Arlo, where it's a sort of funky band stuff. What do you want to say about navigating those different genres and sort of understanding the roles of bass and low end versus, graphic quality of an instrument? Like, does that really sound like a drum set in front of me?
Yeah.
And things like that.
Yeah. I think for me, I kind of go into things being like, if I was on a dance floor, like, how would I want this to hit my chest? Like, how would I want this to sound? Like, I want it to be big and impactful.
So you got that's a loud day.
That's a loud day. But like I said before too, a lot of, what mastering is making sure that things fit in that genre. So a lot of it could be, I have this mix going on and it's got a cool bass drop and everything. But then I play it against something else in that genre and I'm like, oh, it just doesn't slap as hard. And I'm like, what does it need to get to that level? And sometimes that's just like throwing on a, pop hits playlist on Spotify or whatever and being like, does this sound like it can hold up to that?
Right.
Like that's where it is for me. Like, and I think that kind of loops back to me joking with Tommy and being like, okay, but like, what do I do? Like, what's the solution? It's like, there is none. It's like, you got to take every day. Yeah, exactly. Make shit up. Fake it till you make it, baby. That's how you do it.
So when you want to listen to Spotify, I guess you have fancy consoles where you can press a button. Now you're hearing Spotify in the speakers. You can adjust the level, press another button, you go back to your master.
Yep.
Yeah. If without a fancy console, one of the tools that I found that I've been using for that is called Listen Hub from Sonics.
Oh.
Which is pretty hip because it lets me send the Pro Tools mix over to it or flip over to the system audio and it's doing the level matching thing.
Yeah.
So I can hear Spotify or I can hear a reference mix too.
It's so useful. And honestly, that's a question we get a lot is like, how do you know if something is going to go out and be competitive? And a lot of that, people always say like, oh, it has to be, minus 12 LUFS to go out on streaming or whatever. And I'm like, we literally don't ever look at a LUFS meter. Like, that's total BS. Like, I'm like, this is stupid. Don't listen to what anyone on the internet says about LUFS shit because it doesn't matter.
Fuffs the LUFS.
Yeah, except for Atmos, then it matters. But in general, it's just like you go and you A/B between shit that's already out there and be like, does this hold up to me, blasting Adele or whatever? So that's kind of how we do the comparison. Is like
in that case, the level match is pretty important, right?
Yes. Okay. Yes. And all normalization off on whatever streaming service so that we're actually hearing what's happening.
So when you say all normalization off, what does that mean?
So that will just be, whatever Spotify's algorithm is, putting it across everything so that everything, when you listen to it, it's not jumping, up 10 dB if you have one thing that's...
Yeah, you want all the Spotify stuff to be playing at the same volume.
Yes.
So you want it to do its thing. It's streaming adjustment or whatever,
Exactly.
loudness matching.
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, dig it. All right, so, boy, we're coming up on the end here. Let me look at these closing ones and see if there's anything I didn't ask you. I don't want you to be on the spot, but these are some of the typical jam session questions.
Yeah.
How about this? How about a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce? Something that is fun that comes to mind that the rock stars could use on their next session.
Ooh.
Anything you want to share? I know you've shared so much already.
I know, but still. So this is a trick that I stole from Pete. But PSP makes a plugin called the Vintage Warmer 2.
Oh, yeah.
And if you want like a slap-in limiter on a pop mix, that is the vibe. You just got to like push it a little bit, make sure that your attack and release are like, you get a fast attack happening. And just doing the makeup gain just a little bit harder just helps it slap a little bit. It's just so awesome. And it has a little switch on it that's like the fat switch. And it'll just basically like saturate the mix as well. And that's really, really cool.
That's groovy. Yeah, I always loved the Vintage Warmer. I haven't had it in a minute.
I use that all the time. It's so good.
Yeah, and I just saw the PSP guys when I was Anthony. Met him when I was out at NAMM.
Love that.
Cool guys. I think they're in Poland.
I think so.
Yeah. Anyway, they were a cool crew.
Yeah.
All right. So how about, we've already shared a bunch of other stuff. So let me just go to closing question. This is the one I like to ask all my guests.
Yes.
It's hypothetical. You get to take the Wayback Studio machine.
Ooh.
I don't know how way back you want to go. don't go too far back because you won't be born yet. But but you go back in time and you say, and you find young Raelynn who's maybe making that first a cappella record and thinking, this is pretty cool. And you say, listen, Ray, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day.
Yeah.
What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could at this point?
Oh my gosh. I'm like, what would I
Would you
wanna
say that to yourself? Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. I think I would just be like, you know what you're doing. Like, stay confident in what you're doing. Like, you're doing the right thing. Because I think for so long, when I did switch majors, I felt this guilt that I was like giving up some sort of like future made up stability that I had made for myself, or that I was like letting people in my family down, which was
a big thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah, which was literally not even the case. My parents have always just been like, do whatever makes you happy. Like, go do it. So I don't know why I felt that like, oh man, I'm giving up on computer science. Like, I'm failing at it and I'm doing this other thing. And I think I really just needed to hear that in the moment of like, you're doing the right thing. Stay on this path. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can let your parents know that today you're actually training AI to replace yourself. No, you're not allowed to listen to this podcast, ChatGPT.
It freaks me out a little bit. I'm like, I hope it doesn't get to the point that, I'm obsolete in 10 years or whatever. But I'm like, I don't want to let the fear of something that might not happen keep me from doing what I want to do right now. So I'm like, screw it. I'll cross that bridge when I get to it.
I don't think there's such a thing. I think this is drum machine 2.0.
Yeah, I agree. I'm like, they still want like
cool thing.
People still want to work with people at the end of the day,
Yeah, people will just be like, did you hear that AI record I just made? So cool. Awesome. Well, Ray, thank you so much for joining us here on Recording Studio Rockstars. It's really fun to hang out with you. You're awesome.
Oh.
You make record making sound like a lot of fun. Let the rockstars know, where can they go find more out about you online? Where should they check out your work? What if they're ready to master their next hit record?
Oh, yeah. So I, social media wise, have Instagram. My handle is Raelynn_J, Jae. That's my middle name. And then infrasonicssound.com. That's where we have, our session forums if you want to work with me, or you want to just check out my discography. That's on there. My little bio, little pics of, me sitting in front of the console trying to look like a professional, even though I feel like a child at my desk all day.
Professionalism is overrated.
Yeah, I'm a professional child. But that's where you can find me. I'm very accessible, so don't feel like, we're not open to working with indie people, and we're ready for everybody.
Awesome. Well, Rockstars, thanks so much for listening. Ray, thanks for hanging with us, and can't wait to see you at the next one. I'll probably see you when I bring the studio over to the studio and we do a group interview over there.
I'll be there.
All right. Talk to you soon. Cheers. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Lewitt, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, Isotope, Spectra 1964, and OWC. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, Liz Hulitskaya, and Roberto Oxman de Aragao for additional podcasts and video help. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.